Hello, I'm Sarah, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst. This video is for RBTs who have the basics of ABA under their belt and want to take their skills to the next level. For those RBTs who are ready to level up and distinguish themselves as rockstar clinicians, here are 10 tips for how to be an elite RBT. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get started. Number 1, plan out your session. When you get started with a new session with a client, try to map out in your head what you plan to do with it. What do you want to accomplish? Plan around your client's routine to take advantage of naturally occurring learning opportunities. For example, if your client is currently working on targets related to conversation with peers and lunchtime with peers is scheduled during your session, be prepared to run those targets during lunchtime. That might be a little bit easier to set up than trying to run that target outside of that naturally occurring context. I like to have my programs and activities for the next 5 to 15 minutes of the session mapped out in my head. Of course, as I'm sure you know by now, things don't always go according to plan, but at least you'll have a direction for the session and you won't feel lost. And then if your BCBA ever asks you, what do you plan on doing next? You'll have an answer ready. Number 2, read the instructions. Your BCBA should have written instructions for you on how to implement skill acquisition programs, as well as a behavior intervention plan for any behaviors that are currently being targeted for reduction. Before you run these programs or before you ask questions about the programs, read the instructions first. If the BCBA doesn't have anything written down, or if you read it thoroughly and you still don't quite understand, then definitely ask. It's the BCBA's job to make sure everyone knows what to do. Number 3, along that same train of thought, offer your ideas, ask for feedback, and give feedback to your BCBA. If you notice something that might need the BCBA's attention, if you have ideas about something that might help the client, or if something about the program isn't working, bring it up during supervision, and then proactively ask for feedback about the way you're doing things. This will show conscientiousness and attention to detail, and the feedback will make you a better clinician. Number 4, look at the graphs. It's really easy to get bored or frustrated with running the same program over and over if you feel like progress isn't being made. And sometimes progress is being made, but it's so slow that you can't tell on the day-to-day. You can take a little bit of extra time to look at a graph and see if a program is progressing in the right direction, just to get a better idea. If you don't know how to access or interpret the graphs, ask the BCBA to show you and interpret them to you during your next supervision. This is another really impressive thing to do, and it also gives you insight into the bigger picture of the client's programming. Number 5, prioritize rapport building with your client and having fun during your sessions. If you're bored, then the client is probably bored too. And if the client is bored, that will only work against you. I personally would rather see a lot of positive interaction, antecedent interventions, and incidental teaching with not a whole lot of data collected during a session, compared to a session where there's a ton of data being collected, but everyone's miserable and just waiting for the session to be over. Are we really doing effective teaching under those circumstances? No. Obviously, the ideal situation is a balance between great rapport building and incidental teaching, with implementing and collecting reliable data on programs. I actually have a separate video about rapport building linked in the description below. Number 6, don't stress too much about interfering behaviors. It's easy for one to start panicking when the client gets upset and starts engaging in behaviors targeted for reduction. One might even get frustrated and see the behavior as an inconvenience. But if your BCBA has taken the time to write and train you in a behavior plan and has put the necessary modifications in place to keep everyone safe, remember this: that behavior might be the reason why the client is receiving ABA services and not participating in a less restrictive learning setting. That behavior is how he or she has learned to communicate up until this point. So when you have the opportunity to treat this behavior and teach that client to use functional communication instead, you might be helping them to overcome a huge life obstacle and open up all kinds of doors for them. So when you're trying to get your client to transition to the table for identical matching or something, and then they start screaming and hitting and throwing things, don't take this personally and try to force the transition. This is a really valuable opportunity, and the priority right now isn't teaching the client how to match. It's to teach the client how to advocate for themselves appropriately and use coping skills when needed. If your client doesn't know how to say they don't want to go to the table, then teach them how to say it and then honor that. If they hate working at the table, why is that? Is table time miserable? Can you work on the floor instead? Take a breath. Remember your behavior plan, find your compassion, and stay in the moment with your client. Number 7, Fanny Packs. How many times a day do you find yourself chasing after your client, only to leave the textbook in one room, the tacting cards in another room, the kid's Chewy necklace in the middle of the hallway, oh, and then your client just sneezed and you don't have any tissues? This one goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Hands-free storage is where it's at. Fanny Packs are a little bit better than drawstring bags in that you can get to everything quicker, and time is always of the essence. Plus, you can find some really cute ones. ones. Yoga pants with pockets also work wonders. Number 8, remember that you're working with humans, so talk to them like they're humans. We're not gonna do that. You can use your words. That voice is like nails on a chalkboard to me. It's condescending, it's trite, it's aversive. Would you like it if someone talked to you like that? I can tell you one thing I wouldn't want to do in response, and that's use my words. If you find that it's ineffective to use that same high-pitched ABA voice and using the same words when you verbally redirect every single time you redirect, try something else. Instead of, you can use your words, try this. Hey, what can you do instead? Isn't that nicer? Number 9, educate yourself. You will be a much better clinician if you really understand the underlying concepts and mechanisms of behavior analysis. There are a ton of academic journals packed with peer-reviewed research about the science of ABA. And there are a lot of podcasts too. BCBAs are required to get continuing education credits in order to stay on top of the latest research and maintain their credential. Even though this is not required for RBTs, you can do this too. I would recommend the ABA Inside Track podcast. It's just 3 BCBAs talking about relevant research in a way that's easy to understand. They pick a handful of research articles or a book about a certain topic, and then they review and summarize everything and talk about the key takeaways. I've learned so much just by listening to this podcast on my daily commute. You can find them here on YouTube or pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. I'll leave a link in the description. And lastly, number 10, work where you are valued. If you follow the previous 9 tips here, but not this one, you might be a stellar RBT and make a huge difference in the lives of your clients, but you might not get very far in your career. You also might not be as clinically effective if your agency is getting in your way. If you're not being listened to, or if you're being treated poorly by your supervisor or your agency, consider taking your talents elsewhere. You should definitely try to resolve those conflicts with your supervisor or agency first in a respectful way, but if nothing's changing, you might have to part ways. RBTs are valuable, your job can be very hard, and you deserve to be treated well. And those are my 10 tips on how you can become the very best RBT you can be. If you RBTs or BCBAs or BCABAs out there can think of any additional tips, please share them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.